Multilateralism is more essential than ever, but not in its current form. There is a clear and urgent need for a multilateral system that reflects contemporary global realities, one that is better equipped to respond to modern challenges, and, in essence, one that is fit for purpose. We cannot afford to ignore the need for urgent reform.
External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, in his address at the 58th session of United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, pointed at the deteriorating state of multilateralism and stressed there is a need for a multilateral system that reflects global realities and a need for urgent reform. In this video, we will understand what multilateralism means, where does India stand, and why is there a need for reform. Multilateral is a geometry term meaning many-sided, but now it is used to describe international politics and diplomacy where countries with different goals work together. Multilateralism is a term frequently used in the United Nations, and it's a concept that helps reduce conflicts, terrorism, confront global challenges, and grow our economies. But it is also crucial for tackling big global crises. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, and I quote, "Multilateralism is not an option but a necessity as we build back a better world with more equality and resilience and a more sustainable world." According to the United Nations, the modern form of multilateralism began to take shape with the Westphalian Treaty of 1648, which brought to an end the 80 Years' War between Spain and the Dutch and the German phase of the 30 Years' War. The peace agreements signed in the German cities of Münster and Osnabrück are widely regarded as the origin of the modern international state system. In the 19th century, multilateralism evolved through various stages, reflecting the growing complexity of international relations. The early 20th century saw the formal emergence of multilateralism as nations, which were scarred by the devastation of war, sought to avoid further conflict. The United Nations system is the principal multilateral forum where countries come together to solve global problems. There are currently 193 member states. They hold conferences, summits, and meetings to address important issues. Since 1945, the UN has helped countries work together and create important agreements. The central policy-making arm of the organization is the General Assembly. But where does India stand? Well, this is not the first time Dr. S. Jaishankar has urged for reform in the multilateral structure. India is investing heavily in multilateral diplomacy, including in Quad and G20, and is making departure from the traditional tenets of its multilateralism. To understand why India is removing itself from the old structure, first let's understand India's multilateralism journey. Changing the world was indeed a major theme of newly independent India's aspiration in the middle of the 20th century. But the gap between Delhi's ambition and impact was large. If idealism was the hallmark of India's internationalism in the 1950s, the harsh politics of the Cold War quickly dampened it. In the 1970s, India embraced the radical agenda of a new international economic order as the leader of the non-aligned movement and the Group of 77. The results were meager. The third phase began with the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the emergence of the unipolar moment, and the Washington Consensus in favor of globalization. And as India's own economic model collapsed, Delhi had no option but to temper its political ambitions, put its political head down, focus on economic reform, and prevent the world from intruding too much into its internal affairs. While the imperative of growth demanded a greater engagement with the West, the fear of the US activism on Kashmir and nuclear issues saw Delhi turn to Russia and China in search of a multipolar world that could constrain American power. The BRICS Forum with Russia, China, Brazil, and South Africa became emblematic of this strategy. Delhi soon found that differences with the US on Kashmir and the nuclear issues were easing thanks to George W. Bush's policies. But Kashmir and nuclear question became part of India's deepening territorial and political disputes with China. Delhi also figured out that it was not possible for BRICS to constrain Beijing since China was so much bigger than the other four members put together. As India's focus inevitably shifted to the construction of a multipolar Asia, the Quad and its central role in constructing a stable balance of power in Asia became apparent. As India's bilateral challenges with China multiply, regional and global multilateralism has emerged at the core of India's national security and international relations. C. Raja Mohan, columnist with the Indian Express, writes, and I quote, "This core principle of India's post-Cold War multilateralism has begun to unravel as economic and security threats mounted from China. The problem for Delhi, it became increasingly clear, was from a unipolar Asia dominated by Beijing rather than from a unipolar world led by the US. An expansive and positive US engagement with India aided this profound shift in Delhi's perspective. India embraced the Indo-Pacific idea and revived the Quad that had gone moribund in 2007. This involved greater military strategic cooperation with Australia, Japan, and the US in Asia."
Prime Minister Modi was talking about resilient supply chains, of reducing dependence on China. So I think the interests and the trajectories are different. I mean, there's no escape. For example, bringing a country like Iran, I mean, it doesn't add very much because Iran itself was under sanctions. But someday they'll be very important. But at this point, they're not. Saudi Arabia is a member of the G20. So they're already here. And their ties with the US are very, very close. A century of relationship between the House of Saud and the US is not going to disappear overnight. So I think it's going to be hard for the Chinese and Russians. So their dream is to build an alternative post-Western order based on these kind of platforms. But the contradictions are going to be hard. And I think we've argued this before. This is not the first time the notion that you can build something against the United States began. I mean, going back to the non-aligned movement, before that, pan-Islamic movement, pan-Asian movement, non-aligned movement. Everyone thought they can build something big to challenge the Western order. And I think the logic of economic reform, market economics, has actually moved more countries closer to the West today than in the past. But there are a lot of resentments against the West. I think China and Russia are tapping into some of that. But tapping into resentments is not the same as building a powerful, credible platform against the US and its allies. So I think India's strategy is to be a bridge between the South and North, rather than mobilizing a trade union and bombarding the Western headquarters, if you will.
That's all for today. For more such explainers, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, The Indian Express. Thank you so much for watching.